Hey YouTube, and welcome back to the IoT Developer Masterclass. So in previous videos and sessions, we've been studying about how we can use the ESP32 to connect multiple devices or IoT devices together, and how we can connect them maybe through MQTT. And in the last series of videos, we looked at how we can start using the Raspberry Pi, which is a little bit more powerful than the ESP32. Now, for our next set of videos, we want to look at how we can use face recognition to control IoT devices. And so, in this video, we will be looking at facial recognition and how we can use it to trigger on some certain commands on a Raspberry Pi or general devices. Now, stay tuned, you're gonna enjoy this. For example, we would be looking at Raspberry Pi device that's been connected to multiple LEDs. You can see the LEDs here, right? We have a red, a green, a blue, and a yellow, and a white indicator LED here that blinks when our Raspberry Pi is on, right? We also have a camera that's connected to the Raspberry Pi, and when the camera detects a particular face, it's going to trigger on one of these LEDs or a specific LED that you've actually put in a setting or command for it to trigger. Now, for example, let's say we want to quickly do some configurations. We can go to the settings tab here, select our camera, and once our camera is activated, you can capture the images. So let's say I capture my image and add it, and capture a second image and add it, and now we can save. So let's tag this and we'll select a blue LED, and maybe we want the blue LED to be on whenever it detects my face, right? So once I submit that, it saves the images to the device. This could take a while. Okay, now with the images loaded, we can go back to our home screen here where we have our my name, Francis Blue, and our LED device for blue LED command for on. And once I connect, so this is showing the camera from the Raspberry Pi, and now anytime it detects my face, the blue LED on our device here should come on. So let me try that. So as you can see here, it's detected my face. It says it with a bounding box of Francis Blue on it, and the blue LED is now on. If for some reason I cover my face, and now my face is no longer detected and the blue LED has gone off. Now if it comes back, if I open my face again and it detects my face, you could see the blue LED has come back on. Now, you can do this for multiple settings, right? We could decide to do a different setting where we would go to the settings tab here, and then we can select our camera again to activate it. And then I could take some snapshots. And now once I save this image, I can maybe tag on the red LED this time to blink. So we'll do Francis -red. And we can say red LED, and I want the red LED to blink, right? So once this is saved, it usually takes a while to load the image because of the size of the image and the type of camera that I'm using, right? So just give it a few seconds or a few minutes, maybe a minute or so for it to load. Yeah. Okay, there it is loaded. Now, once we acknowledge the success and go back to our home screen, Okay, I also have a second computer connected on the same Raspberry Pi host name. So you can see my host name is Raspberry Pi 003.local, and the port that I'm working on is the 8000 port. And now, if my face is detected, we should see the red LED start to blink, which it is, and the blue LED is on. And you can see the names, the Francis Blue and Francis Red, are added to the bounding box. Also, if I decide to close my face, you can see that the red LED and the blue LED now are off. The red LED is no longer blinking and the blue LED is totally off. And if my face becomes open and it detects my face, the blue LED comes on and the red LED is blinking. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment on this video and I will try my best to answer. And again, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share these videos. And I'm pleading, I really do need subscribers on this channel, so please subscribe to my channel. And now let's get into it. So our primary aim for this session is to be able to use Raspberry Pi for facial recognition. So we'll be using the Raspberry Pi. We'll be using primarily face recognition to be able to recognize faces, and we'll be using fast API and some other tools, right? We would also be using OpenCV, but this is primarily just to access our camera. Now let's go a little bit detail into a system and what we will be building. Now here we have a Raspberry Pi microcontroller, and our Raspberry Pi here is accessing the camera, right? Constantly accessing sensors and actuators, right? So the cameras are being accessed, and basically depending on the face that's being recognized, right, an action will be taken, right? So primarily what we'll be doing is the Raspberry Pi will process the image, look for the faces in each frame of the image, try to put a bounding box around those faces, and then once a particular face for a particular user has been detected based on the setting that the user has specified, an action will be taken to light up one of these light bulbs. To get those settings into the Raspberry Pi, instead of coding them and having default settings in the Raspberry Pi, we would be accessing our front-end service, which is essentially just a web server for static HTML files, right? So we'll be able to access a web page, and from that web page, we would be able to set, and we would also be able to see the image that the Raspberry Pi is looking at. Now we'll be using WebSockets for that, right? So if you look here, our front-end service is accessing the image viewer service, which is essentially just a WebSocket service, right? And it constantly sends the image as the image changes to our front-end service, and our front-end service can then show it on the user's browser, right? The other thing that happens here, so there is a camera here that's connected to the Raspberry Pi, right? However, to take the image for the setting, we'll be using the camera on the computer that the user is using to access this service. Now, basically, once the user access the service on that web page, and you'll see that later, you'll be able to take a snapshot or a few snapshots and then set a particular action to trigger when the face on that snapshot is detected, and based off of that, this Raspberry Pi will take that action, right? Okay, so the other thing that is going on here is for these settings to take, for us to be able to set the settings on the Raspberry Pi, we will need some APIs, right? Some REST APIs, right? And so we have a REST API service here, and that REST API service, it has the get, post, and delete methods for getting the settings that has stored in the Raspberry Pi, to add a new setting to the Raspberry Pi, to also delete a particular setting from the Raspberry Pi. So we'll be able to get that done here, right? And based on what's going on, whatever setting you set on your Raspberry Pi, we have a persistent database storage here, which is our SQLite database, right, to store each of these settings. So when you upload an image, that image gets stored in our database as base64 image for now. And when you set the setting, it will also get stored in the tables in the SQLite database. Now, these two items here are internal services that are being run by the system, and we will talk about that later. So once the system boots, right, we have an image recognition service that constantly takes a snapshot of whatever is on this camera. And as that snapshot is taken, it processes that image. And if something in the setting that's stored in the database, if it recognizes a face from the database that's been loaded, it will then take an action, right, to trigger on an LED or a device, right? And that is done using the device control service. Now, let's go ahead and set up our Raspberry Pi. So go ahead and get your SD card for your Raspberry Pi if you have that. Let me go ahead and get mine. So I'm going to go ahead and format it quickly. There is a great tool called SD card formatter. Very, very good. There we go. So there's my SD card, and that should be done. Okay. So now my SD card is formatted, right? And so the next thing to do now is to open our Raspberry Pi imager. So if you didn't watch the last video, please go ahead and watch that. All right. So we explained there how to set up all the settings that we need for our Raspberry Pi. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and set my Raspberry Pi up. So again, remember, it's not good to have the Raspberry Pi with the same name on your network. It could get conflicted, right, with the naming convention, right? So best things to do is just make sure you have a good name that's unique to that Raspberry Pi. So I'm just gonna go ahead and press Command Shift X, right, or Control Shift X on your Windows. Alright, so I'm gonna name my Raspberry Pi 003. Username and password, you need to set that. So I have my username as Pi, Raspberry. We talked about this in the previous video. Password, I think it's Raspberry, right? This is my Wi-Fi network that I'm currently on, and then the password for my Wi-Fi. And I set my location, right? And I think the only other thing was the SSH, right? So I enabled SSH and use password authentication for SSH. I think that's all you need to do. Everything else looks good, so I'm just gonna save this. And now I am going to choose my device, Raspberry Pi 3. So here's a Raspberry Pi 3. And now I'm gonna choose an operating system. I'm just gonna choose this one, the first one, Legacy 32-bit Lite. All right. So it's quite small, so it shouldn't take much time to write. All right, so Raspberry Pi Legacy 32-bit Lite, which is the first one here. I'm gonna choose my storage. So that's my storage that I just formatted, the 16 gig drive for Raspberry Pi. So I'm just gonna select that. And now that's all. And next. So it says, would you like to apply the OS customization settings? Yes, these are those settings, the name of our Raspberry Pi and other things that we set. So I'm just gonna say yes to that. And all existing data on your mass storage device will be erased. Are you sure you want to continue? Yes, I do. And now it's asking for my password. So this is gonna probably take a few minutes. While it installs, I'll go ahead and set up my Pi, and we will be back. Yeah. So while we were writing the OS image into our SD card, I took the time to set up my circuit And here's my circuit. It's right here on this table here. And if you want to build your circuit, you can also go to the face recognition Raspberry Pi folder repository here, and then just go to circuit here. And once you open that folder, you should see the circuit here. Right, so essentially what it is it's just red, yellow, blue, green, and white. The white is our indicator LED, so it will constantly blink every about 1.5 seconds. The green and the blue are default switched on, while the yellow and red are by default switched off. And we're going to be able to control this 4 LEDs, the red, yellow, blue, and green, using face detection. Okay, so now that we're done with this, we can click on continue, and now I can put my SD card into my Raspberry Pi. I have now loaded that in. It will take roughly about 3 to 4 minutes. I think it's really about 3 minutes. I just like to wait for 4 minutes just in case. So I'm just gonna wait for 4 minutes, and after that I'll be back and we'll continue with the setup process. So we have now waited about 4 minutes. It's past 4 minutes already. So let's try and connect to our Raspberry Pi over SSH. So I'm going to open Visual Studio Code, and we're going to use that to load our code. So let's try to connect. Similar to the last video, we're gonna need remote SSH to be able to SSH into our Raspberry Pi using Visual Studio. So if you haven't installed that yet, please go to your extensions on your Visual Studio Code, and you can either install remote SSH or you can install remote development. Remote development is what I have installed. If you have this installed already, we can go ahead and configure our host. So first thing we want to do is to click on this icon down here. If you have remote SSH installed, you should be able to have this icon here which says open a remote window. Once you click on that, we're gonna click on connect to host, and we're going to click on configure SSH host and just pick the first one. So now let's just copy what we have here from our last video, and we're going to paste that down there. And our Raspberry Pi is Raspberry Pi 003, and we're going to change this to 003. Now, so this is configured correctly. So host is Raspberry Pi 003, host name is Raspberry Pi 003.local, and then the user is Pi. So that's what we have configured here, if you remember. So X, you see we had the Raspberry Pi 003, we had our username as Pi, and we have the password, which is Raspberry. So we're going to go ahead and connect to this. First of all, let's check our Wi-Fi connection. I have two different Wi-Fis, one for my IoT devices and one for personal use. So I'm just gonna make sure I'm on the correct Wi-Fi. So I am on the correct Wi-Fi for my IoT devices in my home. So let me go ahead and connect. So we're gonna click on this icon again. We're gonna go to connect current window to host so that it doesn't open a new window, and we're just going to select Raspberry Pi 003. Now if everything goes well, we should get a new fingerprint, that a new fingerprint has been detected, so what we're just going to select continue for that, and now we'll need a password for our Raspberry Pi 003, which is Raspberry. So now it's connected, it's asking for the password again. So we're gonna put in Raspberry, And now we should be fully connected, right? So I'm gonna create a new folder for applications, just like we did in our last video. So we should have a folder called applications, and now I am going to open that folder using Visual Studio. So I'm just going to go to applications and connect to that. So I'll need my password again, and it should ask for it a second time. We have this connected now. Okay, so now let's go ahead and copy our code into our folder. I'm gonna open up our repository, and we're just gonna download the repository for our face recognition Raspberry Pi. So let's go to downloads, and in downloads we just go to branches, and we could just download the main branch. I'll download the zip file, and I'm just gonna open that. So here it is. This is the zip file that was downloaded, right? We're gonna rename this to face recognition. And I'm just gonna drag and drop this into our applications folder in our Raspberry Pi. Now that has been copied over into our Raspberry Pi. We have all our files here. We're going to need to install these 3 scripts here. This is for the OpenCV installations, right? There are a few dependencies that we'll need to install. There's a lot of installation dependencies that need to happen right before we install OpenCV, and we're also going to need to install face recognition.py. Right, this is the version 1.3.0, so we're going to use pip to install that, and then we're going to install our application dependencies that we're using for applications. So this is more like our SQLite database. And then we're going to be running a web server, right? So we're going to use fast API for that. We're also going to need pip. I think pip is installed in one of the previous dependencies anyways. So we might not need this here, but that's fine. And we're also going to need our OpenSSL because we want to have a HTTPS server on here. So we would have the ability to use both HTTP and HTTPS, right? So in our requirements.txt, we're gonna install Pydantic, Fast API, and .env. Now that we have our files here, for this installation, because sometimes my Visual Studio code loses connection with the Visual Studio code in the Raspberry Pi, I'm going to use terminal for my installation. So let's go ahead and open terminal. You have terminal here, right? And we're just gonna minimize this for now and go to our installation. To use terminal for installation, the first thing we have to do is to connect terminal to our Raspberry Pi. So I'm just gonna copy this here, SSH Pi at Raspberry Pi. So depending on the user and the name for the Raspberry Pi you have, right? So our user is Pi, and our Raspberry Pi name is 003.local, right? So we're going to run that on terminal, which should ask us for our password for Raspberry Pi, which is raspberry. And once we have that done, we should now be connected to our Raspberry Pi. Now, the first thing we would like to do is maybe to check if our file system is expanded. Now, if you install the same version I have, the Bullseye. You probably don't need this step 1 and 2. You don't need it because by default, your Raspberry Pi file system should be expanded. Right, so if you run this, you'd see we have we had about 16 gig of space, right, on our SD card, right? So if you check what's available, here's about 13 gig of space, and the rest should probably be fine. So I think the file system here is already expanded, so we don't need step 1 and 2. So if yours is not expanded, you might want to expand it. Right, so let's go ahead and do our installation. So the first thing we're going to do is to install our OpenCV. So in order to do that, first we have to make sure the script is runnable. So we have to make it runnable. And we're going to run this command. Oh, sorry about that. First we have to go into the folder. So we're gonna cd into applications, right, and face recognition, right? So that's where our file is. So if you noticed, right, it's in the face recognition folder, and that's where install1 cv.sh is located. So let's go ahead and do that. So chmod +x install1 install-1-cv.sh. So we're gonna make that runnable. Now once we have made that runnable, install OpenCV and its dependencies. So sudo /install-1-cv.sh. So we're gonna run that, and that should start installing our dependencies. Now this should take roughly between 15 to 20 minutes to run. So I'm going to pause here and I'll be back when it's done running. So now the OpenCV has finished installing, and it's just good to check, just make sure that OpenCV correctly installed. So to check that, use Python to check that. Yeah. Python, so we're going to run Python, and then once we're inside the Python, we can import CV2. Now if we do not get any errors, that means OpenCV was properly installed, which is what we have right now. Now if there are errors, there might be cases where you're running a different environment or you're running a different Raspberry Pi. I'm not sure. I'm testing with the Raspberry Pi 3 and Bullseye, right, for OS version. So there might be cases where it might not install, and you might just have to try to figure out what's wrong. Now you could try reinstalling the cases where reinstalling the OpenCV might work, or just try to see what's wrong. But it's good practice to just make sure before you proceed that you can actually run OpenCV. Now, so since we did not get any errors when we import OpenCV, we can quit this. And now the next thing we'd like to do is to install face recognition. Now that shouldn't take us much time. So basically we need to ensure that we can run the script, right? So I just like doing this just to make sure. And once we have that, we can now run the script itself. And if everything goes well, we should be able to install the dependencies for face recognition. Okay, so now we've finished installing all the dependencies needed and face recognition .py version 1.3.0. So again, it's just good practice to make sure that it's installed properly before we continue. So let's go ahead and run Python again. And we're going to try to install import face recognition and see if we have any issues. So import. import face recognition. And if there are no issues, then that means that we are good. So let's just hope for no issues. Great. Now we don't have any issues with face recognition. So hopefully we are good with our installation at this point. All right, so I'm gonna quit out of this. And now we're gonna need to install our core application dependencies. And to do that, we would run the third script. So that's just the install -3. So just make sure we can run it. We have the necessary. So let's make sure we can run it. And then let's then run this. And if everything is okay, it should take a few minutes to install. So while this is installing, I'm just gonna pause here and we'll be back when it's done. All our dependencies have been installed. Now, the final dependencies, you'd see here that we have country name code, right? You need a 2-letter code. This is happening because we're planning to use HTTPS server, right? So we'll need SSL certificates. We'll need to generate some SSL certificates for our HTTPS server. And we'll discuss more about that later. All right, so what we're just gonna do, we're just gonna put in our country code. So I'm just gonna put in US and I just click enter for the rest. It's not needed. So now that we have all that done, we should have our SSL certificates and key file created. So what we're gonna do next is run our application. However, before we run our application, we can check the .env file, right? So basically what it's saying here is that we are not going to use HTTPS, we're going to use HTTP, right? Use HTTPS, that is default as false. Now we're in applications, so let's cd into face recognition and just make sure we're in the correct folder. Yep. And we're going to run python main.py. Now that's cool, right? So basically we have our application loaded. Let's just copy that. And we're going to open this in a browser. So let's paste that in here. So we're running on localhost 8050. Right, so you can replace this IP address with localhost. I think that's fine. We don't have to use that. So yep, so as you can see, it's running. So we have our application loaded. You can see our white LED is blinking, right? And fortunately it looks like our blue and green look like the same color. Okay, so let me see what I could do about that. So I changed the lighting in the room a little bit, so I hope you can notice the difference now between our green LED and blue LED. It's a little difference there. It's not very clear from the camera. I think there's a camera isn't picking the colors out very well. But here's the green LED, here's the blue LED, here's the yellow, and here's the red. Right, so our indicator LED is running, showing that our application is running, and we can actually get access to our camera by clicking the connect button here. And essentially what that does is it connects to the WebSocket. We're going to go over the code once we finish with the installation, but essentially we have a thread that's constantly running and taking snapshots every second from the camera and sending that data to our WebSockets here. If a certain face is detected, then it will perform a certain action, right? If there are no faces, then no action will be performed. Also, whenever a face is detected, it will put a bounding box around that face so that we know that a face is in the current frame. Now, if the user is not known, if the user is not known in the system, it will put a bounding box and label it as unknown. So, for instance, if I were to go over now. So I'm hoping you should be able to see my face in there, and there should be a bounding box on there that says I am unknown. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to try to take some images of myself and load it into the application. So to do that, that's already set up in this web application that we have here. So we're just gonna go to settings and we're gonna select the camera. So there are two cameras that I have right now connected. I don't know which one is which. I think, unfortunately, the Firefox browser doesn't get the name of the camera, right? So it comes up on the Chrome browser, but not on the Firefox camera. So let's just go with camera 1 and USB live camera. I think that's correct. So yeah, that is correct. Right, so you can see here that I am in here already. So I'm just gonna take a few snapshots of myself and load it into the application. Let me see if I can get a little more light in here. Okay. All right. So let's take a few snapshots. So I'm just gonna, you can basically, there are a few buttons here. You can use this to select the camera again if you wanted to. You can click on that and it'll just ask you if you want to select the camera. You can select that, right? And you can use this to take a snapshot, and you could, after you take a snapshot and you add it, it will show up here, and you can use this to delete the last snapshot that's been added, and you can save it to the device with this. Just a simple UI, nothing really much. All right, so let's go ahead and take a nice snapshot of myself. Maybe I need to smile. Okay, I'm gonna add that. And maybe one to the side. I'm gonna add that. Maybe one without my glasses. And I'm gonna add that. Now, it requires a minimum of 4 for this code. So if you click on this, I'll tell you, oh, error, add more images, minimum of 4 images are required. So I'm just gonna take another one to the side, maybe this way. And then I'm just gonna add that. Okay, so now that we have this added, I'm now going to save these images into the Raspberry Pi. So let's just go ahead and save it. So I'm gonna name it, let's say Francis dash. I think I want to control the red LED. So the red LED by default is off, so I want to control that. So I'm just gonna do red, Francis red, and I'm gonna select the red LED, and an action that I would set will be on. So by default, I think the red LED is off, right? So it's not showing here, so just making sure of that. Well, so anytime it detects my face, it's gonna put in a bounding box called Francis red, and it's gonna turn the red LED on, right? So let's go ahead and save this. So it's gonna take a while to save and load the image, right? One way we can check that is we can come back to our code right here. You can see the application has been paused while it processes the image. It has to take the image, process it, save it in the database as base64, and then upload it from the database, and then try to process and get the faces out of the image, right? And so that the face recognition can use it. Now let's go back here, and you would see that it has successfully been loaded, right? So success images were saved successfully. Okay. Now, if we went back here, right, we would see that we have Francis red as one of our settings. We can delete it if we want, right? Or, just if you add more, you can also add as many as you want. Now, what happens now is when I go to look at the camera, right, it will detect my face now, and basically it will put on the red LED. So I'm gonna put this open here, and I'm gonna go over there. So once it detects my face, right, you can see the red LED has come on, right? So basically, once it detects my face, the red LED comes on. If my face is not, if it doesn't detect my face, it'll probably take about a second, but the red LED will go off, about 4 seconds, right? Detects my face again, red LED comes on, right? My face is closed and it can't detect me, red LED will go off. So you can see how we used face recognition to control the light bulb. Now we can add more settings if we wanted to. So let's go back here and let's add more settings. Capture. Okay, just take more images, maybe with me without the glasses, and then add. Maybe to the side, and then add. Probably take one with the glasses, and then add probably a final one. And then add. Now once we have all this, let's save, and we're gonna save this as Francis Green. Right, and we can select the green LED and select an action for the green LED to blink. Right, so now both the white and the green LED are gonna blink once it detects my face. Right, and the red LED will also come on. Right, so let's save that. That should take a while, so we just wait for it to load. Okay, so it's still loading. Not sure why it's taking this long. Usually it doesn't take this long, but you can see here that it's importing the images, and it's just going to take a while. So now we have 8 images, right? So we had 4 previously, and now we have an extra 4. So it's probably going to take a lot longer to load all 8 images. So let's just wait. Okay, so our images have finished loading. It took a little longer than I expected to load. Not sure why, but you know, the camera also plays a role in it. If your camera is a high definition camera, it might take longer to load an image, you know, and other things. Now you can reset the code. Basically, one image is enough, right? It's just, I just put a clause there to take at least 4 images, but usually if you have one image, it should be enough. If you wanted to just take one snapshot and use that to test, right? It should be able to detect your face out of one image. So however, I just wanted, if for some reason I didn't find your face in any of the images, at least within 4 images, you should be able to get one image where your face is properly detected and cataloged in the code properly. All right, so however you want to do it, that's fine. Now once we have this done, now you can see we have this success message, images were successfully saved. Once we click OK, we can go back to our home tab here, and if you scroll down, you'd see that we have both Francis Red and Francis Green, right? And you can actually delete any of this. However, you know, we're testing right now, so we don't have to do that, right? So now let's see what happens when it detects my face. So I'm gonna go over there again. So once it detects my face, the red LED should come on and the green LED should start to blink. So you can see the green LED start to blink, right? And now the red LED is on. Now once my face is closed, now we see that the green LED stopped blinking and went back to its default state, which is on, while the red LED went back to its default state, which is off. And now once I open my face again and it sees my face, you can see that the red LED comes on and the green LED is blinking. So this is just a simple use case, right, of face recognition for control. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe and share this video, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.